live. We're doing our third show, and now the response has been wonderful. My co-host Dave DeCosmo is here with me. And David, I have to say that people are watching the show.
Well, it's a good show to watch.
It's a good show, David. It's a public service, and we're doing a great job trying to get everybody from Lackawanna County and the surrounding areas. And we have a lot of guests coming up that are going to be wonderful. But today we have a wonderful guest, and I'm excited about it. And I want to make sure I pronounce your name right. Executive Director, Lackawanna County Historical Society, Mary Ann Moran Savakinus.
Savakinus,
all right. Well, I was close, Mary Ann.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. The first time, because David was so excited about this show, and the Historical Society, everybody people don't really love history like they used to. I love history.
Oh,
David loves history.
Yes, yeah.
We're trying to, and actually I studied history in college for years. So you're trying to keep history alive in Lackawanna.
That is our entire mission. The Lackawanna Historical Society has been around since 1886, so it's very important to us that we continue to move forward and grow and document our history, and the only way we can really do that is to keep people interested in history.
Right. And you have some great shows. You have some great shows. You have a lot. I've gone there, seen different people speak on the Civil War, World War II. The Vietnam War. It's just wonderful. I spoke at the Historical Society a couple of times about Vietnam.
I'm sure you did.
It's just a wonderful, wonderful location.
Yeah, we have a beautiful location. We're located in the Catlin House, which is at 232 Monroe Avenue, and it's a beautiful 1912 residential building, and it's surrounded by the University of Scranton today, so it really represents a piece of the past because it's an old house in a very modern day setting. And as you said, you've been inside the house. We have a lot of exhibits that deal with our local history, and we do a lot of programming. So we bring in speakers, as you said, you spoke on the Vietnam War. We just completed our Civil War weekend a few weeks ago where we do a Civil War ball. We did that at the Cultural Center. So we try to do programming that is either a straight lecture that will educate the public, or we try to do an entertaining program where the public can get involved directly in celebrating their history.
One of the reasons I'm so happy that you agreed to come on our program is I see the Historical Society as a very much, generally speaking, untapped resource. I think a lot of people know that we have the Eberhart Museum in Lackawanna County, specifically in Scranton. I'm not so sure that as many people know that the Historical Society has a lot of programs, but many of which are centered in what amounts to another museum. And that's the place that you're talking about right now.
Yes, the Catlin House. And in an effort to try to break away from being Scranton's best kept secret, we have tried to do programs inside our building and outside our building. So we've expanded our outreach through doing that. And we actually partner with the Eberhart Museum. Next year we'll mark the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, and the Eberhart is going to do a huge exhibit because they have this space to do these sort of exhibits, and they'll be using artifacts from our collection because we predate the Eberhart Museum. We're the oldest cultural institution in Lackawanna County, and people don't realize that either. But Lackawanna County, which is the youngest county in Pennsylvania, the 67th, was founded in 1878. The Lackawanna Historical Society was formed in 1886. So 8 years into our existence, the Historical Society began to document that important history.
And I know we want to talk about your programs that you run beyond your base. But when I called you to talk about this program, I asked you to bring some examples of some things along so that we might get an idea, just a little tiny sample of what people will see or can see when they come to the Historical Society. And when we walked in today,
I'm looking at this hammer.
I thought that was your gavel.
Yeah.
I try to bring things that you can
It's very heavy, Mary Ann.
Do you know what kind of hammer this is?
I have no idea what it is. I'm not too handy with hammers, but it's very heavy.
It's a heavy hammer because it's a special hammer. It's called a farrier's hammer, and this was used for horseshoeing. So when we talk about Lackawanna County history, as I said, the county started in 1878, but our history is much earlier. We had settlers into this area as early as the 1840s, 1820s, 1700s. We had a couple of people roaming around. But before we had the industry that we so much relate to our history today, we had early settlers traveling on horseback. So I brought the farrier's hammer as an example of that, and there's an interesting story that doesn't directly relate to the hammer, but it does relate to people riding on horseback. This month, the Historical Society, we're always actively collecting, and this month we received a donation from a member of the Peck family. Now, when you hear the name Peck, you're being from the Mid-Valley,
That's right.
you're automatically
Peck lumber.
thinking of Peckville and the Peck lumber.
Peck lumber, sure.
Those are one family of Pecks that lived in our area, but in the 18 teens, there were a group of Methodists. They were all Methodist ministers. There were 5 brothers, and they were the Pecks. And it was George Peck who first came into the Lackawanna Valley as a Methodist minister riding the circuit to spread the word of Methodism. And this month, we just received his saddlebags. So talk about a wonderful donation that really tells us a piece of our
Riding the
history.
circuit, he actually went from church to church. He'd preach
There were
at
no
one.
churches. He went from house to
House to
house
house.
because it was in the 1818 is when he came up from Wilkes-Barre, or what we would call Wilkes-Barre. He came up to what is now Scranton and Dunmore, and there were maybe 5 or 6 families living here that early. So he just kind of visited and started to spread the word of Methodism. So I brought this as a very early piece of that
That's
history.
wonderful. And
Now-
David, I wanted to say one thing. This has a special place in my heart. Mary Ann showed me this before we went on the air. First National Bank of Jessup. It's a deposit, and
It's a
and
money
I'm
bank,
old enough
yeah.
to remember. The bank's been around how long? I mean,
1909 is what I have in my
So I
records.
remember in the 1950s they used to use these bags.
Sure, and
when I used to go
it's-
to the bank.
Probably originally would have had a leather band. This is somebody put a string on here. But this is in our collection. We do have a lot of early pieces from the Historical Society's collection. I brought this item in
have no
as
idea what that is.
a guessing game. And when I came
Looks
in,
like
I
some
asked,
kind of clippers.
are either one of you wearing loafers?
No. Thank God. I don't want that anywhere near me.
It's called a boot jack.
Ah, yes.
Okay,
yes.
and even in coal mining areas, think of the men working in the coal mines. They worked all day. They were leaning down. Their backs were probably killing by the end of the day. So when they came home from work, the last thing they wanted to do was have to bend over and take their shoes off. So this item you would basically put on the floor and slide your heel into it and then step on the back and you could
Oh my
pull your
God.
shoe off.
That is amazing.
So-
Can I see it, please?
You sure can.
I never saw anything like this.
And this is the kind of thing that you would only be able to see probably at something like the Historical Society, because there are probably a lot around in the days when it was popular, and now it'd be hard to find.
Well, yeah, and we like to try to relate the present day to the past. And I know when people come into the Historical Society, we have this gorgeous Wooten-style desk on the second floor, and it's a desk that has 111 cubby holes, and the whole thing locks and has a combination. And when we have 4th graders come in for a tour, I tell them this is what we used before computers, because you had all of these modern-day conveniences in 1870, like this, where it would make your life a little easier, which today doesn't make a lot of sense, but at one time it did.
And
No.
this looks like a rock, but it's extremely,
very special
or
rock.
a cannonball.
You know what, David? I thought it was a cannonball.
What is
Because and it's not. I thought it was.
This is a rock from the Archibald pothole. Now, when the Historical Society was founded, I said we were founded in 1886. Our original name was the Lackawanna Institute of History and Science. And this was before the Everhart Museum existed. So we were not just documenting our history, we were documenting our science and our geology. And people don't know this. At one time, the Lackawanna Historical Society owned the pothole.
Oh, I
When the
did not know
pothole was
that.
discovered, it was discovered by a mining company out of Archibald. I think the name was Edward Jones, was the miner who owned the company. And someone named Simon, I think there's still a lot of Simons up in Archibald, donated this rock. But it's such a strange looking rock. It looks like a cannonball because it's very, very round.
Yes.
But if you think about how the pothole was formed during the glacier period, when everything was spinning around and around, you didn't just get the pothole, you got what came out of it. So this goes back to our science days.
That brings a story to my mind that is worth repeating, because, and I wish I knew the names of the individuals involved. Unfortunately, I do not. But a gentleman from WDAU television was actually on a cruise somewhere toward the Caribbean, I'm assuming, many years back. And on the tour that gentleman was taking, they came across a glacier-formed pothole. And the tour guide told this gentleman and the rest of those on the tour that they were witnessing this glacier-formed pothole, which was the second largest in the world. The gentleman then asked, "Where's the largest?" the gentleman from Lackawanna County, was told that the largest was in fact the Archibald pothole.
Which was true until about 5 years ago.
Found another, did they?
Luzerne, Switzerland has somehow overtaken us in the size of the pothole.
Well, I was in Lucerne.
Okay.
I did not get to see the pothole.
Okay.
I think we may have come across a couple on the bus, but not quite that large.
Right.
But I think it's interesting that people in our own region may not realize that something like that pothole, which has a scientific and a historical value, is in fact one of the largest, now the second largest in the world, and it's right in our own backyard.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at this hat. I'm not going to put it on.
Looks judicial.
David, do you want to wear this hat?
I'm not sure that would be the.
It works.
David, try to put it on. David, you look great in that hat.
Ah.
Yes, you do. Are you
If I
wearing-
only had a cane.
And if you only had tails. Now,
didn't bring
where did you get this hat, Mary Ann?
This hat, this is one of the pieces, and you can see by the wear and tear on it, this is really part of our study collection. These are artifacts we take into the schools and we share with children so they can, again, get an idea of what the past was like. And this hat is an opera hat. And now today when you go to the theater, you don't usually run into the problem with someone sitting in front of you with a large hat.
Right.
But back in the day, everyone wore these hats.
And
Like-
people wore tails.
Yes, and they dressed up,
That's
and that
right.
was the way that things were done then. But people wear baseball hats today. You don't see gentlemen wearing hats that
Right.
often.
You know what I noticed, Mary Ann, and you're right about that. Even if you go to an upscale restaurant for dinner, you know, people don't dress up anymore. You'll see men coming in with sweaters on and jeans. I'm talking about upscale
Yeah,
restaurants.
yeah.
And it wasn't like that 30 or 40 years ago,
It's a
never
different
mind
one.
in the historical
Yeah,
era.
this probably would have been more than 30 or 40
Yeah,
years
right.
ago. But if you went to the opera and you didn't want to be, or you didn't want to be impolite, you wanted to make sure your hat was not distracting the people sitting behind you. So you would take your hat off and you would put it under
That's
your seat.
right.
So it's a collapsible hat.
That's
So
right.
it's another one of those really strange convenience pieces that we have.
And let me just add, David and Mary Ann, when presidents, they would wear a hat like that sometimes when they were
Oh,
sworn
inauguration.
on,
Yes,
on
yes,
inauguration
yes.
day. But John Kennedy,
He was the,
he didn't like it. He didn't like it. He only wore his hat for pictures, and he took his hat off.
and that's when everybody stopped wearing
Everybody
hats.
stopped wearing
correct,
hats.
yes,
Yeah.
That's right.
yes. I find something you said interesting because you mentioned on one hand that kids come to the Historical Society, and on the other hand, that you go to schools.
We do.
So this is a constant effort, I guess, both internally and externally,
Yes.
to make sure that the young people know a little bit about our history.
Yeah, and more often than not, you find that it's harder for the students to come to us. And it's a little tricky in our building. As I said, it's a residential building, so our rooms, especially on the second floor where our local history exhibits are not that big. So we can accommodate groups of maybe 20 to 25 students, but when you get large groups, it's a little easier if we take a traveling trunk or a program out to the schools, and we can get more people involved with that. Or sometimes we do special projects, which is the one coming up this weekend. This project that we're doing this weekend was actually created by 9 local high school students who came to the Historical Society on various days when they should have been in school at class, but instead of going to school, they came to the Historical Society with their teachers and learned a lot about Lackawanna County history so that they could create the local history game show that
Now
we're going
that's
to
it.
run this weekend.
You're actually going to do a game show, and it's going to be what? Questioning people on our history?
Questioning, it's a Jeopardy-styled board, if you ever watch Jeopardy,
Sure.
and it is multiple choice answers. We don't want to embarrass the people who are playing because we have 24 local personalities who have agreed to play the game for us. And they're playing on teams against each other. And the questions relate to Lackawanna County history with topics that include people, places, industry, sports and leisure, and what we call potpourri, which are just questions we came up with that didn't really fit in
So
a
you
category.
might, for instance, ask, Lackawanna County was formed out of what other county? A, Columbia, B, Wayne, C, Luzerne.
You got
And
it.
the answer, of course, would be C, Luzerne.
You knew that, right?
Am I correct, Judge?
You're correct. It's Luzerne, and it is Luzerne actually. And a lot of people are saying that when Lackawanna County left Luzerne County, that it was a mistake because we had the population that we should have kept it as one county, but I'm glad it's split. Now it's Lackawanna County. I'm looking at this. I see David Wenzel. David Wenzel's a
Wenzel's
close
playing.
friend of mine, and Dave the Cosmo. He's one of the guests.
He's one of the contestants.
He's a wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful
So
man.
who will be asking the questions?
Well, we have two celebrity hosts. On
Okay.
Friday night, we have John Webster of WIOK.
Yes, yes.
And on Saturday night, we have Ryan Leckie from
From
WNEP.
WNEP,
And
sure.
they will be co-hosting with the high school students that created the game, because the students are really going to run the game, and then the celebrity hosts will ensure that there's some interaction with the
Now,
contestants.
you've got to have a lot of questions to have a game like this.
We've created over 180 questions at last count. The kids are still writing the questions. Every day we email out new questions.
Is that
But,
right?
Where are you
it's a
going
lot
to
of
do
fun.
this?
Shopland Hall at the Cultural Center.
Now, not everybody will be able to make that. You ought to be able to see it somewhere.
Well, you can see it right here on ECTV.
Great.
We're going
That's
to
what I
tape
love.
it.
Yeah, I love ECTV because they do everything to help the community. Now,
Fabulous.
something like this, people would never see it, they never know about it, but ECTV is going to run it.
But it was part of our mission as
Yeah.
a way to spread the word of local history. We thought it would be fun to bring all of these people into Shopland Hall to play the game, but then we wanted to ensure that we continue to let people learn about local history in an entertaining way. So in the summer, there's 6 games that will be played throughout the 2 nights, and those 6 games will be turned into episodes to run on ECTV.
That's
So-
great, and of course, as with our program, we do the first Monday, we do the Monday show live, and then
Right.
it's repeated during the week via tape. So this way you'll have multiple chances to see these games and probably play along with them.
That's what
and
we're
try to
hoping.
get those answers.
Well, we're hoping that it encourages people to get more interested and then do it on an annual basis and have different people come every year and play. And one thing that we didn't mention on our flyer is that when the games are starting, before each game there'll be a raffle, and we'll pull names of people from the audience so that the team of 3 celebrities will be joined by an audience member.
Oh.
So the people who come, they can play the game that night live. So.
Sure.
You know what, Mary Ann? I'm a big history buff, as I said, and I was very disturbed when I was watching television a few months ago, and it said that like 20% of the students don't know where the Atlantic Ocean is, versus high school students versus the Pacific Ocean. I'm not kidding, David. And they have no idea where what the New England states mean. I mean, that's too bad. But whatever happened to history? I mean, why are people like
I
that?
think part of the problem lately is that you don't get, and again, I'm biased, but you don't get enough of the local history to connect to the national story. And we have history that happened right here in Lackawanna County that relates directly to national events. If you talk about the labor movement in our country, you can't not mention the strike of 1902 with John Mitchell and Clarence Darrow coming to Scranton. So there are things that happened here, and if we can make that connection in the schools, then I hope that children will be more interested and learn the larger picture.
I might be wrong on the 20%, but it was a percentage that got me upset.
Well, let me say this. I just happened to see a story on Eyewitness News about the sharp increase in the number of tourists coming to the Lackawanna County coal mine tour since the mining disaster.
Yeah.
So you see, you're right. When you can equate our history with what's happening today, it becomes far more interesting. And what I always found great about history was that there's stories. Who doesn't like to see a story? Who doesn't like to watch a drama? Well, those dramas are based on things that actually happened. They may be rewritten in all kinds of ways, but they're still very, very valuable. And a lot of our history is fun as well. And I can't say that without looking at this table and noticing this. So, tell me, Mary Ann, about this.
But you'd want to talk about fun history, and I mentioned that some of the questions in our game show are going to deal with arts and leisure. Lately, it's very difficult not to talk about our amusement park right here in Lackawanna County in Moosic because of the documentary that was made last year, the Rocky Glen Park documentary. And that's another piece of our history that we often forget because we're so involved in the dates and the names and the places that we forget that the people who were here working as hardy immigrants were also looking for leisure activities and entertainment. So we brought the tray from Rocky Glen just to represent something that was one of the fun pieces of our history.
That's great, and I remember Rocky. I think the irony about not having Rocky Glen now is the fact that virtually right next door you have the Moosic Mountain, Montage Mountain, with all kinds of exciting things on that of course they do attract tourists. And I guess our tourism industry could be even bolstered more when we talk about some of the things we had here. And that gets me to your external efforts out of the building itself, one of which fascinates me because it's at Halloween or around Halloween.
Oh, okay.
What does the Historical Society do that's been bringing people here for Halloween?
Well, we've always done a cemetery tour. I don't know if that's what you're talking
That's
about.
it.
We actually have spun that off this year into the volunteer group that run it themselves. We'll still go out occasionally and do a walk through Dunmore Cemetery, because if you've ever walked through Dunmore Cemetery, you will see names of almost every town, because the Archibalds are buried there, and the Germans are buried there, and the Scrantons are buried there, and the Dixons are buried there. So it's a really clever way to get people excited about history, especially at Halloween, because everyone says, ooh, let's go to a cemetery, but then when we get them in there, we pour in all of our history facts into their brains, and they go away
And
learning.
the guides actually are dressed in
The
costume?
guides are dressed in costume, and they
Period
present, they present living histories of the stories of some of the people who are buried there. We have kind of shifted in the last year to do paranormal walking tours now, and we do those through the downtown of Scranton, where we do architectural walking tours, which we do on a regular basis anyway. And we'll go to different buildings around town, talk about the history and the architecture of the building, and then we have a local group of paranormal researchers who have done research in some of the buildings, and they'll talk about some of the unusual happenings in the buildings. So.
Nancy Kamen from WILK just did some work with them, if I'm
Okay,
not
good.
mistaken.
Yeah.
Marianne, if I could get, I have a son in 4th grade, and we usually, they had a tour of the courthouse last week.
Okay.
Now, if I can get the school to agree to allow the children next year in 5th grade to go to the Historical Society, is it a day-long tour, or is it a 2-hour?
The groups are specially designed. The tours are designed for the group's wishes. If we bring school groups in,
Like
sometimes we
25
connect
kids.
with the University of
Yeah.
Scranton so that they can take a tour of the Historical Society's building, then go over to the estate building and take a tour of the Scranton Family Home, which
So-
is now part of the
okay.
university. Maybe have a lunch stop somewhere on campus, and then walk down to courthouse and do a tour of the architecture.
Do you think
So
kids in
we
5th
can-
grade would understand that?
I think they would. We get them from all ages, really, and they're always fascinated with different aspects of it, but they go away learning
Are
something.
you the tour guide?
I'm one of the tour guides.
You're the one I'll call. You're the one I'll call.
I have a great cast of volunteers, though, that are also well-trained to give tours.
You've touched on various things here. Overall, how do we shape up? Do we have a lot to offer from a historical point of view?
I think we do. I think that our history is fascinating in that it's so people-oriented. We have such a diverse community still today, but throughout our history. We have always had different groups of people coming in with stories that are so interesting on an individual basis, but then relating to the larger picture. And you can take that from the story of someone who might have been from here that fought in the Civil War, someone like Ezra Ripple, who was later a mayor of Scranton. He was Lackawanna County's first postmaster, but he was also, as a young man, a soldier during the Civil War who was a prisoner and served as a prisoner at Andersonville, which is one of the hardest
That's
prisons
right.
in our history. And he brought that story back here. He took that story into the classrooms. That was what he did. He went into the schools and told what happened to him as a prisoner. So just one person's story has so much to offer, and I really like to focus on the people's stories.
Right,
when
and
we
being a
talk about
lawyer and a judge, I'm fascinated by Clarence Darrow. And when he was here in 1902, I read every single piece of material I can get on it. Actually, I'm just reading another book about it now, but Clarence Darrow was the lawyer's lawyer. I mean, here he is, he's dead. He's dead at 80 years or whatever it is, and people still talk about
He's
him now.
coming to Scranton this weekend, isn't
He's
he?
coming to Scranton this, yes, he is, actually.
I think you ought to explain
Yeah,
that.
let's explain that. He is.
Yes.
That's not part of the ghost tour.
No.
No, but you can explain it because we have a great.
It's going to be at the courthouse.
I think his last name is Anderson.
Right.
He's coming in from Idaho to play the role of Clarence Darrow.
And he's going to do it in relation to Darrow's
Yes, he is.
actual experiences in Scranton
Yes, he is.
when he represented the miners.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, the Lackawanna Bar Association is doing it, and it's going to be a very, very exciting event.
So this Clarence Darrow actually represented the coal miners in this area.
Yes, he
He
did.
And was that in relationship to John Mitchell's work with the
Yes.
miners?
Yes, it was, David. 1902. But I mean, everybody asked me the question, where did he stay? I mean, Clarence Darrow was almost presidential in those days. Like,
Yeah.
people looked at Clarence Darrow like he was the hero of the world. He saved so many, and he had a lot of unpopular cases.
Oh.
But
Well, he's probably best known for the Scopes, so-called Scopes
exactly.
monkey trial.
And Leopold and Loeb also.
yes,
But the
yes.
Scopes monkey trial, that
But
was,
before that, he was here, right?
he was here,
Yeah.
yes, before that. I mean, but Clarence Darrow is something. But my whole idea is to get people to understand history, because everywhere I go, I talk to people about history, and they don't. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't care anymore.
Well, again, I don't know how history was taught when you were in school. I know a lot of history when I was in school was taught by the book, and here's the dates and here's the places, and they were faraway places
Yeah.
and faraway dates. So just trying to connect it locally, I think, is the most important part. And it wasn't just Clarence Darrow that was here, it was President Roosevelt. So,
President
I mean,
Roosevelt was here. Mark Twain was here. When President Roosevelt was here, but he wasn't president when he was here. I don't think he was. I think he was here after he was
He
president.
was here for the trial.
Oh, but he wasn't president.
Yeah, he was.
Well, then I'm wrong. Marianne, congratulations. I'm not going to fight with this story.
I wonder if that's one of the questions.
Yeah,
And the upcoming
Marianne, I'm going to
program.
have to check that out. Teddy Roosevelt was here when he was president.
Yes, when the strike was going on.
Because I know he was here after he was president, and he went out. He was in Oliphant.
Yes. Yes.
And he went to Oliphant, and he knocked on the lady's door. He wanted to see Monsignor, David. I just have to tell you this. He wanted to see Monsignor in Oliphant. He knocked on the door. The housekeeper came over, and President Roosevelt, he knocked on the door himself.
Mm-hmm.
He was just out of office a couple of years, and the housekeeper said, Mr. President, the Monsignor's sleeping. You'll have to come back later. And that's a true story.
That's
and
a
he did come-
legendary
And
story,
he
yeah.
did come back later.
Yeah.
To which he replied, bully.
But so you said he was here.
When the 1902 strike was going
was
on,
president
he was
then.
president. He set up the commission. That's when Darrow came in to represent
Right.
the miners, and he came in to set up some meetings. He wasn't necessarily here for the actual
I know-
trial,
well,
part of
okay,
it,
but that's
he
what
was
I-
here to set up the meetings.
Oh, okay.
I think you've touched on the key here,
Right.
and with your question or your concerns too, Judge, about why are people more interested in history, when you can take the historical facts and present them as a story, a drama, if you will, when you can take something about Rocky Glen,
Yeah.
and people then remember that they're there. You have this, for instance. What is
But,
this?
you're talking about things and getting people's attention, and it's a little dress, obviously. But the question that we always ask people is, who wore this dress? Who wore this dress?
Not Teddy Roosevelt.
Not Teddy Roosevelt, but he could have, because
Yeah.
this is a little boy's dress.
Is that right?
Yeah, and that's another thing, like the hat and convenience
Right.
items. If you had a baby, whether it was a male or female, you wanted to keep things simple for changing, things like that. So all little boys and little girls wore dresses, and this is a little boy's dress. And we know that because the lace is not quite so feminine, and it also comes with the provenance that tells us that a boy named Orlando Moyer wore it when he was 3 years old. So we kind of
That's
like to
something,
point things
isn't it?
out like that. Did you wear a dress?
No, I never wore a dress. No, I
No,
never
but
did.
again, that's the kind of thing, now you're relating a story, you know an individual's name. You can turn these artifacts into actual living history in terms of stories, and that is what's most important. So that could be a question that comes up in this quiz. And again, we should remind people that after that is held, it will be rebroadcast here on ECTV, so you'll be able to catch this. You'll be able to hear these questions, and you'll be able to kind of take a guess yourself as to the answer. That makes this very exciting, I think.
Well, David, we're getting a key that we're out of time, so I just want to, Marianne Moran Savakinus, thank you so much. You were a
Thank you
great,
for
you were a
having
great
me. Thank
guest.
you. Thank you.
David and I love talking about history. We
Very
talk-
enjoyable.
And you really are a great guest, and I want to thank you for that. And David the Cosmo, as usual, David always asks the right questions. Nobody's better than David the Cosmo when it comes to asking questions.
Still learning.
We have a
all the
great
time.
show here, David, and before I sign off, I wanted to say that we have a lot of guests coming up in the next few weeks, wonderful guests.
Yes.
And Marianne, you are a wonderful guest
Thank
also.
you.
So on behalf of ECTV Live, this is Judge Tom Munley. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Monday.